This month on the First Person Podcast, special guest Cameron Kunzelman joins Chris, Rob, and I to talk isometric RPGs. How and why has the genre persisted after all these years? What function does long-form textual narrative have in today's attention economy? We also talk about Cameron's ongoing video Let's Play of Baldurs Gate, Mages and Murderdads, as well as his work with Waypoint and Paste. My name is Alexandra Orlando, and you can find me at AlexGOrlando.
I'm Chris Lawrence. My Twitter handle is @QuipsLawrence.
I'm Rob Parker. You can find me on Twitter @RobotParking.
And for this month's podcast, we have a special guest. Cameron Kunzelman is joining us, and he's going to talk to us about some Baldurs Gate and isometric RPGs in general, and Mages and Murderdads. So thank you for joining us, Cameron.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe we'll just start off with, how's it going?
Yeah.
What's new? I know that Mages and Murderdads is coming out slowly. You released a lot of new articles as of late.
Well, I'm making Birdman hands right now to demonstrate all the different things I have coming out and the absolute greed of my nature. But yeah, no, I have a lot of things that are going, and it's going pretty good for me. How about that?
Excellent.
Perfect.
Yes, we can get the visual along with that as well.
Yeah, please add a GIF of Birdman just grinding them hands together.
Can you just do that right now? Thanks, Alex. Okay. Thanks.
On the fly.
Yeah, right now. Oh no! Wait, did we just do another bird joke? We're 3 podcasts in a row of bird joke centric episodes now. Yeah, that's not good.
It's been a difficult punning season for Bird Person.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll go a little specific and then branch out to a little general. Why did you choose Baldurs Gate for Mages and Murderdads? Why that specific game series?
So Mages and Murderdads is a passion project because I like playing Mages or Baldur's Gate. Yeah, we did that because we, from a YouTube-y kind of perspective, we just enjoy playing those games. We haven't played them in a very long time. But B, I think they're games that normally only get talked about in a very specific kind of game design-y context. The idea of solo runs or specific kind of party runs and min-maxing characters and things like that. And if you go to any forum thread or if you go to the Reddit to look at how people talk about that game, it's in a very specific kind of way. And so we didn't want to do that. We don't really much care about that. And we thought it would be fun to explore that world and do it real slow. So yeah, that's why we did. That's why we chose Baldur's Gate, I think. There's discussion of doing some other games or maybe some newer games in that style. So Pillars of Eternity, that kind of thing. But we aren't doing that.
Yeah, I'd like to think that game scholarship also tends to put Baldur's Gate in that sort of realm as well. I know when I was talking to Steve Wilcox about Deus Ex, because we're doing a series similar with Deus Ex 1, and it's the same sort of thing. It's it's this seminal game, and it has these foundational mechanics and things like that. And it's no, there's actually really good writing here, and we really want to break that apart. So it's too interesting that you're citing that as the same thing for you. But yeah, I think that we've also seen this kind of resurgence, and you talk about this in your articles as well, about the isometric RPGs kind of coming back with Kickstarter. And for some people, it might be their first go at the genre. So it's interesting to kind of go back and take a look at not necessarily the origin, but one of the first classic games of the genre.
What's really interesting is I think that they are. It is not really. We have not reckoned with the fact that how niche those games are, despite being really good sellers at the time and having a really great resurgence and Kickstarter and all of that. But they're hyper niche, really weird games. And when we only talk about them in that big macro kind of game designy perspective, you lose some of the fine grained strangeness, like hedge mazes, or not hedge mazes, but hedge wizards and things like that are all in that game.
I've also really appreciated Mages and Murderdads because I have so little time these days to like go back and play older games that it's been really helpful to just like get a sampling of this game that I'm probably never gonna, unless I'm like, maybe when I retire, I'll put together a computer.
If you can still use a computer.
That'll be my old man phase. I'll be in my garage putting together an old computer that'll run Baldur's Gate so I can finally play it.
Computers will be too small that you won't even need to take it to the garage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, climate change is going to kill you before then.
Well, that's a cheerful thought too, I guess.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
Great.
I often think about these kind of games too like Rob said, he doesn't have time to play, but I think it's also like people don't have time to give these games the attention they deserve. And I've grilled a few like narratologists on this at the Games Institute, but I've asked them like, how do most people have time to read all the text in these games in an era where like Vine is dead? And like, I know that maybe that's not the era as like the Vine dead era, but like the attention economy that we live in, how it's amazing to see how like these Kickstarters are continuing to be successful, but also do these games hold up?
Yeah, I'm deeply interested in whether people actually read these games. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if people spend the amount of like in-depth time to read the 12 different options or whatever that you can choose in dialogue, especially for like Torment and games like that. I would love to see any kind of analytics that are getting pushed back to the developers from these games. And I'm sure that Beamdog for the Enhanced Edition Baldur's Gate games I'm sure they're collecting some kind of analytics, and I'm sure that Torment is too. I'm really, really curious about what those look like, and they can grab them, right? There'd be no problem with that. So someone should listen to this and do that.
Yeah, really. Especially we were talking earlier about Baldur's Gate and this connection to like, not necessarily like the modern isometric RPG, but like what they've kind of turned into for a more like mass audience.
Yeah, I've been sort of trying to trace some DNA lineage from Infinity Engine games like Baldur's Gate to early 6th gen games from BioWare, like the Knights of the Old Republic games, onto newer stuff like Dragon Age. I'm kind of thinking, riffing off both your question, Alex, and comments in your podcast, Cameron, regarding the sheer abundance of text in Baldur's Gate, as well as, I guess, kind of your conflicted response in your Numenera review to games that read like novels. So this led me to think of kind of a trajectory in other series like Elder Scrolls, which has moved from all text and mountains of dialogue, like in Daggerfall, to all voice acting and a lot less dialogue, like in something like Skyrim. I'm also thinking of similar trajectories in indie games like Thomas Was Alone and Dear Esther, which involve a great deal of narration and or dialogue, but use voice acting to tell the story rather than asking the player to read. I realized there was no question mark at the end of that paragraph, so let's
it's literally
see.
reading a prepared statement.
A one-sentence question. Let's try this. From a player experience standpoint, I'm wondering, this is kind of an open question, how does this tension between reading and being read to govern things like pace, agency, player anxiety even?
Yeah, it's interesting to be able to see how those things come together in the enhanced editions of Baldur's Gate. So there are new encounters and new characters that are added for those editions that were not in the original game, and they are voice acted. Mm-hmm. And they have entire like dialogue trees that are fully voice acted out, as well as Siege of Dragonspear, which was Beamdog, the developer of the enhanced edition. They're like solo expansion pack, single game kind of. It's a weird little intermediary thing, but it has full voice acting, and I find it unbearable. Like I can't get through it fast enough because maybe there's something about the novelisticness of it or noveliness of it, in that things that work in fantasy writing, fantasy in particular writing, do not work when spoken. Like, it sounds ridiculous. It pulls you out of like any kind of belief that you might be having. And so, yeah, talking about pace and that kind of thing, in some ways, voice acting completely ruins that. And I think that you do see a massive tonal change between those early Infinity Engine games and then like the KOTOR and then on through Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Like naturalistic dialogue becomes the thing that drives the whole game, and that's a removal of long text dumps. And the reason is that it sounds bad. Well, it's like not fun and not good.
Yeah, even to move it like almost adjacent to I know Chris mentioned Daggerfall, but like Skyrim, that first companion you encounter, like one of the major like fan responses was kind of frustration that she just seemed annoyed that she was following you around, that she was like more or less stuck with you. I think mostly coming from just the intonation of the voice actress. Because if that text were just to appear on the screen, it would just be completely flat. But she wound up becoming, for me, a very endearing character because was a counterpoint to this whole epic narrative, and it's just this one person is just like, this fucking asshole, I have to follow him everywhere. Like, again, we're stopping and gonna go find this guy's dog, and like the world is ending, dude. Like, we have other things to do.
Well, and when you have a voice actor, they're taking a very specific perspective on that character, and from a role-playing standpoint, that kind of takes away from your own like creation of the world when you're thinking about these characters, especially if you're like looking at Baldur's Gate and the artwork for the avatars. Some of them are kind of ambiguous, and I like that. And as soon as you add a voice actor to that, you're kind of altering even like a little bit how that character might be. And sometimes that can go fine, and then other times, if you think of and I'm going to bring up Deus Ex again, but like Human Revolution's character, the black woman who's voiced by a black woman, but has a very specific take on what a black woman sounds like, and offended a lot of people. And then all of a sudden you have it all, the onus is on the voice actor to kind of like own up to that character. And it just was a huge disaster. So like, that's, I guess, a larger answer to your question about like voice acting is like, sometimes it is nice to be read to, but like, I think very specific games benefit from that. Like you mentioned, you didn't mention Stanley Parable, did you?
No.
But like Stanley Parable or like those like voice driven like kind of narrations, it can work, but it's really difficult when you're doing something that's so very role play based.
Yeah, your initial point, Cameron, that voice acting has a danger of just completely breaking and ruining fantasy dialogue in particular, has a particular anecdotal resonance for me right now because I recently read aloud The Children of Hooting by Tolkien with my partner, and it was fucking terrible.
Have you heard the Lord of the Rings audiobooks before? Because when he sings those songs, oh man, it's worse than reading.
I need to find videos of those songs. I'm not saying I'm going to use them for mic spam, but I might use them for mic spam.
Not good for a car ride. Fall asleep. Easy.
Well, at least that's like a travel. It aids to your travel, right? Because it gets you by.
Oh, it ends my trip real quick. That's what happens.
It's adjacent to this, but like I've been playing a bit of the new Division mode that came out with the DLC, and I swear to God, there are people that just put down their mic next to like a speaker playing like very aggressive EDM music, and it's just like constant to the point where I don't know what's going on until I find the person to mute them, and it's the whole muting system in the Division is a nightmare. I've been compelled to find a way to fight back, and I feel like those Tolkien songs might be it. So thank you, everyone.
Oh,
go team!
Yeah. Any more thoughts, Cameron, before we change the subject? Any more
everyone
hot takes?
Who is reading J.R.R. Tolkien has made a mistake.
Oh,
shit!
Shots fired. I deserve it. I'll take it.
You should be reading a Troy Denning D&D novel.
I only know him as a Star Wars novelist.
He did some Forgotten Realms novels, I think.
Did he write about Drizzt?
No, he did not.
Okay.
How dare you?
Okay, sorry. That's all I know from the D&D novels.
Monster. Yeah, he wrote a bunch. He wrote like 15 Forgotten Realms novels.
Dang.
Mm-hmm.
I need to bone up.
Yeah.
I'm leaving right
to
now.
eBay.
We sort of already mentioned this already, but we were talking about your recent review of Tides of Numenera.
Torment. Tides of Numenera.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. You have to have your the colon.
Yeah.
Right. Torment : Tides of Numenera. And you talk about how like you're playing through a good novel. We kind of already touched on how games tend to absorb other types of media, and I think we could just add an aside in saying like games are trying to be movies more than anything these days. But do you think that it's just a function of the relative age of video games or an overall cultural insecurity about just games as games, or that they need to reflect other things to have some sort of appeal outside of just being a game?
I think that it's a byproduct of player analytics in some ways. I know I was just talking about how much I wanted to get some. The idea that you're like kind of racing to the center to find action beats over and over and over again. So right, the films have the 10-page rule, and subdivisions of the 10-page rule. Video games have the 30-second loop or whatever the language is of that. Novels have, action novels in particular, thrillers have their own systems of pacing to have people be interested. So I think it's just a race to best practices across multimedia formats. And we can just see those best practices appearing in each different media form. So it's kind of like a meta attention-based question or answer for me more than it is anything else. So yeah, so that's why The Walking Dead feels like a movie or a TV show. It's less trying to emulate that format and more emulating the best practices that make people pay attention to that format.
Right.
I think.
Which then I guess proves why games that try to be movies that are like 30 hours long doesn't really always work when movies are not 30 hours long. Or at least I haven't seen one that is.
You got to watch Berlin Alexanderplatz.
I'll add it to my list. I'll add it to my my Letterboxd watch list. Another thing that we're kind of seeing, not necessarily brought back, but at least brought back more into the spotlight, are non-D&D style pen and paper rule sets. Shadowrun and Torment, for example. Do you think there is room for a completely new isometric RPG set in the D&D world? With a new rule set, basically, or
yeah, I'm sure that there is. Like, I know that you could do it. I don't know what the benefit of doing that is. The second edition implementation of the Infinity Engine games is so clunky and kludgy, and they did Temple of Elemental Evil that was third edition rules, and it was even more complicated and difficult. I really appreciated Tides of the Numenera because it is using this Numenera system that is less complicated, more universal in the sense that the resources you use for fighting or for talking or for using skills are all the same resources. So it's a very flat system across the board. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that someone will be trying to do that, like a classic D&D kind of style or a 5th edition D&D kind of style. I would be surprised if it is a full implementation rather than like a fork of the rules.
Yeah, I I run some tabletop RPG games occasionally, and I typically stick with Powered by the Apocalypse. One, because it's hard to find players and find people who have the time to play. So Powered by the Apocalypse is an easy way to like get people in because it's really approachable and generally it's like, oh yeah, okay, I know these systems after about 40 minutes or so, and you're not really going to encounter anything too outlandish, and you can kind of hash it out and move on. Whereas like if you try to, hand someone like a Vampire the Masquerade rule book, it's like, okay, read this book, then read the supplemental book, then read this other thing. Oh, fuck it, let's just go LARP. So what I really appreciated was like I was excited that Torment Tides of Numenera was coming out and was using the new Monty Cook system, but I still haven't sat down and read the rules for that, like the tabletop version. And playing through Torment, I'm not super far into it, but playing through it and like understanding that I have different stat pools that I can use to push different activities depending on what I wanted to do was like really, I found that to be actually really compelling, and actually made me want to go and actually sit down and read those rules sooner rather than later and actually play through it.
Yeah, to riff on that just a little bit, I play a little bit of D&D myself, and I am that player. I'm that awful player that everyone dreads who has to be told laboriously in small words every turn which dice to pick up, which to roll, how many times to throw them, and which number to consult on my sheet. So I dig the role-playing elements, but once you get into the numbers game, you lose me.
Quips, we need to play some Powered by the Apocalypse games.
I think so.
It'll change your life.
And accordingly, my experience with Infinity Engine games like Baldur's Gate is it's not the text, it's not the dialogue that tires me out, that stresses me out. It's the combat, it's the min-maxing, it's the stat monitoring. So I'm immediately more drawn to something like Planescape Torment, where many of those features are still in place, but the emphasis is on the dialogue. It's on, as you might describe, Cameron, the more novelistic aspects of the experience.
Yeah, I've always been frustrated by like the combat of second edition D&D and Baldur's Gate in particular, but also I don't care for Planescape Torment at all. So I think I actually like land somewhere in the middle. Like I don't know if I came to that game at a bad time or something like that, but I find it very painful to play. Like I think I need the almost downtime of combat, in the sense of like this game will play itself to some degree, and I just have to like reload the game enough until I get through it, rather than like sifting through pages of 90s philosophy dialogue.
Yeah, and especially if you're looking for that combat downtime in Planescape, that's a bad place to be, because that's what drove me away from that game, was the slogging through the combat, and like I'd spec my character entirely just to talk to people. I eventually hit a wall where I was just like, I don't want to do this fight anymore. I don't want to reload and do this fight anymore. And I was kind of vindicated / maybe dismayed by hearing like you and Danny talk about the combat in the Baldur's Gate games, where you're just like, yeah, you just need like an insta kill weapon to get through this encounter, because it's nightmarish otherwise.
Yeah, some of the Baldur's Gate encounters are just straight up broken from a design perspective, and that's funny, but also very frustrating at the same time. Yeah.
Well, especially when there's just like encounters that aren't helpful or useful at all, like maybe slightly narrative wise, but as far as worth your time and effort, sometimes not so much, especially if they don't drop anything good. Mm-hmm. And that is the worst thing in the entire world, because you hope and you dream, you're like, this has got to have something good, and then it's like, nope, screw you wasted your time. I do like maybe as another suggestion to throw at you, Chris, is to get Divinity Original Sin. I like the combat, sort of. I like how they fixed it since like the first one, but it has a little bit of a tactical element to it, which I really like. In some ways, you can actually think about the map and like the positioning of your characters in a little bit more detail than other games, where I find that I'm just like clicking all over the place and they're just running around and trying to get to like the waypoint and things like that.
You're just trying to get me to throw more money at good old games. There's a sale going on right now and everything. I've picked up most of the Divinity games, but the older ones, I haven't actually gone Original Sin or further than that, and I've tried so hard.
There's two things that I like about Original Sin. One is you can play it multiplayer, and your characters, like, you can straight up just pick other dialogue options for your character and kind of goof up the way the encounter plays out for the other player if you want to like be that person. And the other is, if you pick one of the abilities, you can talk to a dog, and there's a whole quest.
All animals.
You can talk to all animals, but like there's a dog quest where you're like solving a mystery with the dog or something like that.
Yes.
And that's the only reason why I want to play that game, which is like a really bad reason to go and play that game.
Yes, especially because to get to the first town takes a bit.
Yeah.
And to get to that part.
Yeah.
Y'all are jeopardizing my Switch fund, just saying.
The older Divinity games are really interesting because they are from that kind of Morrowind and Two Worlds era of game design, where you can just kind of do whatever you want and create. I think you can create and enchant items, and it can like really spiral out of the designer's control in a really fun way.
That sounds a bit like Morrowind, like just being able to create your own spells that are just utterly bananas and will destroy the game.
The other cool thing about Original Sin is that you can talk, your player characters can talk to each other and like not necessarily develop a relationship, but like you get like little bonuses depending on what you agree on and what you don't agree on and things like that. So you can like role play with your friend.
Those Switch monies.
Yeah, that's the thing, I guess, is that like, when's the last time like the masses have flocked to like these kind of games? Like,
maybe Knights of the Old Republic is kind of a liminal case. I don't know.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate 2 sold quite a few copies. I mean, it was a big hit. It just cost so much to make that I think it ended up not being profitable.
And you just started playing that, right?
Yeah, we the second episode will go up next Thursday.
Nice.
How do you kind of tackle that in like a conversational format? Because I'd imagine you're not like talking through the entire playthrough, or at least like from the videos I've seen, there's like edits made and it jumps around a little bit. Like, how do you decide, like, okay, this is what we're going to tackle?
Yeah, we have a pretty good sense at this point about like what makes an hour. Since we kind of know that, we just we have like a 30-minute meeting before we record an episode where we have full recordings of everything that we play through, and I edit those down after we record the podcast. So we like make a show document, and we pick like an hour's worth of stuff. And some episodes especially early in the series, we didn't really understand how much can fit in an hour, and so they're very rushed, and some are filling time, but I think we've really figured that out at this point. So yeah, I mean, mostly things we want to talk about. There's one episode where we spend 30 minutes talking about refugee crises and how they function, and so sometimes we go far afield from what the game does, but yeah, it's just kind of arbitrary, which reflects those games, right, where there's a lot of arbitrary content throughout.
Who did the beatboxing for the intros for some of the earlier videos?
It's me.
That's you? You were doing the beatboxing for the guys
saying,
so saith the wise Alondo? That's good. That's good to know.
I'm a classic talent.
Good talent to have. I will not lie, I actually have rewound that multiple times because it was just like nodding along. I was like, yeah, this is all right. I could listen to an album of this.
Surely there's a YouTube proof of it somewhere.
Oh, God.
I hope so. If not, the internet has two things to do. One, get gamer analytics, get like playthrough analytics to Cam, and then also get me that looping.
You're implying that he wants to write the article, analytics.
No, just send them to him. I don't care what he does with them.
Yeah, I just want to know.
Yeah,
there are lots of things that I have learned for no discernible purpose, especially around video games.
What's an example?
I've done a lot of like research about like pre-release and release materials for video games that has never gone into anything. I'm reading 2 Baldurs Gate novels right now.
You were reading through like a lot of old magazines for a while.
We made a huge mistake.
Yeah, like a lot of old gamer magazines and stuff like that, like Nintendo Power and Computer Gaming World, I think.
Yeah, I read through Electronic Gaming Monthly.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That was actually worth doing. I read through a little more than 10 years of that, and then my scanner broke, so I could no longer scan the pages, so that project kind of fell on the wayside.
We actually have a scholar here who's doing early like 80s magazine reading as well, like kind of going through like the early like tech specifically related to like, you know, gender and games and things like that. But it's a task. Like this is their whole thesis, is just like reading those magazines. So going and doing it like for not that must be just like enormous and so daunting.
I mean, there's a lot of research. Someone published a book on that last year, 2 years ago. There's like a short book of going through early video game magazines from like the late 80s and early 90s. So like, I'm really glad that people are doing research on that. And like, my thought was to eventually do something with it. I haven't figured out what that would be yet. But yeah, it's daunting in that there's a lot of filler that you don't care about. But it is interesting to like look at gaming magazines from like 1988 to maybe 1993, 94, and see all of the ads that are targeted specifically to women PC gamers. Like that's very fascinating, and that's something you would never see in these like nostalgia YouTube videos for people who love the history of games and things like that. So it's really rewarding when you find the good stuff, but also it is a slog.
I still have an aging stack of like Computer Gaming World magazines still in my closet that I can't bring myself to part with, in part because I liked the write-ups of like stuff that just never got released. There was a very controversial magazine where they like a lot of the letters that were written after the fact, because it featured like sexy vampire lady on the cover, but they were just like World of Darkness, like White Wolf was doing a whole bunch of computer games, and like 2 of them came out. But at the time, it was like a full feature. We went and played all these games, and one was like looking into, you know, the werewolf stuff and showing how they'd had some like kind of scent tracking mechanic built into the games. So like looking at these really old screenshots of stuff that just never saw the light of day was really cool. But then also because it had the sexy vampire lady on the cover, like there were a bunch of letters in the subsequent magazines, basically like, why do we need this, like why do we need this smut in our video games? And then also just like this was embarrassing, and like a lot of some of the similar conversations that like happen now essentially. Time is a flat circle and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is shocking to read the letters columns from 1992 and see the exact same conversations that we have today, like almost word for word being had, but over the course of a few months, right? That's actually profoundly depressing.
For me, it's the stack of Nintendo powers not being thrown out. They really should, because most of them are just like, it's just ads, and then like the magazine itself is just an ad. But going through and seeing how like the press of those games and like hype culture too, you had to get the magazine featuring the game that was coming out, because that was like, you had to get all the previews and all like the information about it, and that was like the one place you could go, but it was like heavily mediated by like the company that was making the game, and like, you know, same with like PlayStation magazine and whatever. But then you realize that that also hasn't really changed much. I mean, we have, you know, gaming press and things like that, but, you know, look at like E3. E3 is like one big Nintendo power.
And they're letting people in now.
Wait, what?
They're allowing like.
Oh,
Yeah.
But I mean, E3 was open to the public before, and then it wasn't.
Yeah.
And then it is again.
Yeah, it was open to the public, I think, when it was in Atlanta in the late 90s.
Yeah. And that was like around the time where I thought I would be able to go, and it was like my dream, because I was like, when I'm done high school, I'll get to go to E3 or something. Or then it's like, nope. But I mean, I hear it's like, there's no point, because like gaming press has basically taken care of all the things you need to know nowadays, and you don't need to stand in the line for hours and hours and hours and like to play a demo.
There's a part of me that desperately wanted to do like an in-depth, like get an actual team of FPS people together and then just do an in-depth rhetorical analysis of E3 as it happened.
Oh God.
And just like post short critiques of the rhetoric on the stage as it happened. And then I was just like, that sounds like a horrible nightmare, actually. So maybe not.
I want to do that and the
bad.
Game Awards.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it seems a bit more doable.
That would be a treat.
Yeah, that's the essay that needs to be written, is like an aesthetic and rhetorical analysis of the Game Awards.
So we're big fans of Waypoint at the site, mainly because we think that like we're both doing sort of similar things with our website and our publishing. So how's it working there and living the dream?
It's good. Waypoint, Austin and Danielle and Patrick and Danica, and then other associated people are all very good. They're all excellent to work with. I think that Waypoint is doing a lot to like elevate the conversation within games. I think a lot of websites have been doing that. I think that Polygon and Kotaku have always been at the front edge of that. I think Eurogamer, in fact, has kind of been ahead of the game in a lot of ways for a very long time in that manner. But yeah, I think Waypoint is just willing to go out on a limb for weirder arguments that pay off in a good way, in like a good kind of academic-y kind of way, or a semi-academic-y way. But more importantly, they're willing to pay for it and pay like a normal freelancer's rate, a good freelancer's rate to do that with. And I think that's really, really valuable for like discourse in general. I mean, the jump for film to being taken seriously as an art form that like deserves criticism came with newspapers wanting film critics, right? In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And so, you know, that's kind of what you have to look for in video games, I think, to look for an elevated discourse, or to see an elevated discourse. A lot of websites have been doing it, but getting one more is not a bad thing, with a really excellent set of editors and writers.
Mm-hmm. And a social media person who is consistently pushing that discourse in ways that is incredible. Like it's a lot. It's very easy to just be like, oh, Danica's just making weird jokes. As someone who's also the senior community manager for FPS, like watching what Waypoint does and knowing that like we could never really go along those lines, in part because we still have to
get shut down.
Well, we have to. Yeah, at a certain point we have to maintain a certain level of like, we have to court certain professors and whatever. And at a certain point, the director of the Games Institute could be showing what we're doing, and to a crowd of people that don't understand Twitter. But I think what Danica demonstrates is like an understanding of the medium of Twitter in a way that is like far and away beyond what most other like social media people are like really bothering with.
And of course, I forgot to say, but not forgot, wanted to say for last, Paste Magazine, of course, Paste Games, kind of being part, at least partially, a canary in a coal mine for like really smart arguments about games. I mean, Paste has been pushing that for a decade now, and that's a really big deal.
What I
A
really
lot
love,
of the writers at the other websites come out of Paste.
yeah, what I really love about Paste is that it's not just games focused. Like there's other channels for it, so it's not just tied specifically to one readership. And I think that's a huge advantage in a situation where if you anger your audience, or if you just say something that people who are just adjacent to your audience dislike, they could start petitioning your advertisers to try to have you shut down.
It's actually really interesting with that, because the only time I've ever really made a community mad through a Paste piece that I've written was with I reviewed Project Cars. I basically just said, like, I guess it's a racing game. That's cool. And the article, by virtue of being in a general readership, not in, but on a general readership website, it got picked up by Yahoo. It was in Yahoo News, and the car simulation community just was irate about my review, which is apparently a very small subset community of people who play these like very realistic racing simulator games. Mm-hmm. And then they like came out of the woodwork to tell me I was an idiot.
I feel like Pissed Off the Gran Turismo fandom belongs on a CV, like at the top.
This is even more simulationist than Gran Turismo.
This is like iRacing.
Dang.
Yeah, there are like a couple games that they play. But they're like basically just physics simulations with cars that happen to be in them.
They've got a racing wheel.
Yeah. No, they have like a racing like full seat thing.
Yeah.
I went and looked it up.
And sleep in a race car at night.
Well, I sleep in a race car.
Who does?
That's not normal.
Yeah.
That's the dream.
It's that Waypoint money.
Oh yeah, I'm just rolling in Waypoint money.
So you talked about public film discourse a bit. Where do you see? Maybe this is too large of a question, but how do you see games public discourse moving sort of away from film? Because I think it's a lot easy for a lot of people to compare the discourse in the film industry and the game industry together, because it's like games are kind of like movies, and they're like the next medium that's trying to like attain this sort of like established credibility. But in a way, it seems we're almost at the state where it's not quite catching on. And like we brought up the Game Award, right? Like I don't think there's ever going to be an Oscars of video games, at least anytime soon. But how do you see like people engaging with game audiences differently than film audiences?
I mean, I think they're similar and different in a lot of different like, structural ways. That I think, like you said, it's a big question. And I think like a real good answer probably has to attend to all of those things. There may be more similar than you might think, and the only reason I really know that is by virtue of being in Atlanta, where we have a fairly robust film industry, and I know quite a few people who work over on that side. The department that I'm in is very kind of tightly bound up in the Atlanta film industry, so I have I think a pretty balanced perspective on those. So bracketing all of that, I mean, I think that like the GDC Game Awards are the Oscars of video games, in the sense of it is the community of video game developers talking to themselves in the same way that the Oscars is the film industry talking to itself. The key difference is that films legitimated themselves in an era where a very small number of outlets vetted all culture. Video games have not come of age in that time. And so it's just a more dispersed, different kind of communication that changes like the cultural impact of these things. But like Call of Duty, people know when Madden comes out, people know when Call of Duty comes out. They get excited about the Nintendo Switch in the same way they get excited about a Transformers game or a Transformers movie. So I think there are a lot of like fan-based or community-based similarities that maybe like in the scholarship we don't pay attention to maybe as much as we should.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk to someone who has kids. Once they hit 3 or 4, it's like, okay, so when's Minecraft gonna hit? And once they hit like 5 or 6, it's like, okay, when's Pokemon gonna hit? And it's every single instance in which I've had those conversations with those friends, it was always like, oh, whatever, like Minecraft will be over by the time they hit that age. And they're like, oh no, I guess I have a whole bunch of Minecraft Lego now. I guess my kids are now also playing Minecraft. I guess I need, what's a good 3DS to get? Because oh god, they want a Pokemon game. I think there's those aspects that definitely bleed out from people, like from within the core, somewhat insular like hardcore culture. In the same way that like if you're super engaged with films, you're going to talk about movies that most people aren't. Like the person on the street isn't necessarily going to know what you're talking about. But if you go and say like, oh yeah, the new Avengers, like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's a movie.
The one roadblock I would say, at least, that we often have is that people don't know it's a thing, right? Like writing about games is a thing, or researching games. But people, at least when you say film, or at least when like we were doing like the film degree, we were like, yeah, we're doing film. And they're like, so you're making a film. And they recognize that at least you're like doing school and movies at the same time. And it's not, how do you write about games? And I think that's what sort of we do at FPS a lot of the time, is a lot of outreach to like different communities here about, you know, this is how you study a game, or this is how you write about a game. And like I do it in the classroom, we do it like when people come to the GI, the games too. That's like the major roadblock, because they don't even think about a game other than just like the thing they play when they're bored or whatever like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think another big roadblock is that people don't think about some things as games. Like there's the classic example of like approaching a classroom of students and saying, who here plays video games? And a couple people raise their hands, and you say, how many people have like a game on their phone? Or how many people play Candy Crush or Clash of Clans or whatever? And you probably double the amount of hands that are up. People don't immediately grok that some of the things that they engage with the most are games. They think of them as apps or as like time wasty kind of things. They
Social
don't
media.
immediately think about them as like games in the same way that Call of Duty is a game. And so there's like weirdly like an internal PR issue to games culture in that way. But it's one that we've done on purpose, right? To get more people interested in downloading video games on their phone. You don't want to make them feel like a big nerd. And so you normalize it by divorcing it from games culture, which is maybe good from a PR angle, but it says something about how we think about ourselves too.
It's kind of part and parcel to Bogos' argument that games are so ubiquitous that we're moving to a point where gamer is a dying identity. Sometimes I kind of hope we'd get there a little faster given the current climate of games culture. Yeah, and this is something, I guess, that has gone on for a long time, right? The video game crash in the 80s. Game industry folks were like, okay, we need to do this again, but stealth. We need to trick people into getting into games again. And you see that again in different cycles with mobile games, or even
VR,
definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Or things as innocuous as like Roll Up the Rim, McDonald's Monopoly.
Anyone who's listening who doesn't know what Roll Up the Rim is, you just roll up the rim and you win.
of your coffee cup.
Of your Tim Hortons coffee cup.
Is this some Canadian witchcraft game design that you're talking about?
Well, you see, we put the cups in a pentagram shape, and then you summon the god Timbit from the sun.
We summoned Tim Horton himself.
Tim Horton,
Timothy.
which, yeah.
So here's a
Back from the
very
dead.
ignorant question. Is Tim Horton a real man?
Yes.
Or was a real man?
Yes. He was a hockey player.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that make us, like, does that make perfect sense? Or just like, you're like, how does a hockey player make coffee?
Yeah, I don't know how they could make coffee, like conceptually.
I don't think Tim
I
Hortons
don't
is
get
actually owned by a Canadian company anymore, though.
No,
They're
they
owned by
got
Burger
sold
King,
off.
aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. At least we're being owned by royalties.
That's why we have
That's
hash
in keeping
browns
with
now.
Canadian culture.
That's why we have sandwiches and hash browns now.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, they rolled that out when like the
The same company just bought Popeyes too. They're becoming like the Disney of fast food.
oh god. Wait, what does that even mean? Wait, McDonald's
Popeyes,
is the
Burger King crossover.
Yeah.
McDonald's is the Disney of fast food.
The game and film adaptations are forthcoming.
Mm-hmm. Transmedia.
Well, to be fair, we already have Sneak King. The best.
There were 4 games.
Yeah.
There were 4 games.
Yes.
Yeah, there's Sneak King, a racing game, and 2 other ones that no one cares about.
We need more fast food tie-ins. We need those.
I agree.
Where the hell is KFC? Is what I want to know.
Well, dealing with bad PR all the time, I think. Because people forget that other fast food places have chicken that is probably treated like the chickens are treated the same way or come from the same place.
I want my isometric RPG where I play as Colonel Sanders.
Oh god.
And my party is just
There
different-
has to be a
different
mod
types of
for
chicken.
that. There has to be a Baldur's Gate mod for that.
Modding Baldur's Gate is very, very easy, especially adding characters.
Ooh.
So
Well, I mean, we just finished that one game, so might as well get started on that.
Yeah, you have work to do.
Yeah.
And then that can be a feature if you're lucky in Mages and Murderdads. You just have the mod episode.
We need to end this. We need to end this murder now. End this podcast right now
before ideas get too wild.
Yeah, Alex, cut this out. I don't want anyone stealing my patent.
You just have to mail it to yourself.
Yeah. Okay. There we go.
But yeah, we'll end on that note.
Thank God.
Thank you very much, Cameron, for joining us. Do you have anything to plug as per podcast regulated question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that Canadian podcast regulations are different from here in the U.S. here in the States. Yeah, follow me on Twitter. That'll be in the show notes or something. Read my weekly podcast, or not podcast, column. It's been a long day. My weekly column at waypoint.vice.com comes out every Friday. You can see me at Paste Magazine.
You guys are doing podcasts now too. Speaking of casting and pods,
we do. I did that podcast today as well, so it's been a long day of talking.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us for ours as well.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to the First Person Podcast. I would like to thank Neil Randall and the staff at the Games Institute for their support, as well as Alex Fleck, our podcast producer. We'd also like to thank Stephen Trothan, who wrote and composed our theme music.